The line between animal and monster isn't always so clear. When people cry wolf, are they always overreacting? Today, we're sharing stories of those who stared into the dark and saw something staring back. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like portals,
Atlantis.
dark matter,
Sex magic.
miracles,
Trolls.
UFO hotspots,
Stargates.
NDEs,
Mermaids.
telepathy,
Remote seeing.
intuition,
Urban legends.
astral projection,
ESP.
all that stuff.
All that stuff and more.
Lots more.
And today, first, I'm Seth Jablon.
I'm Christina Callery.
And today we are talking about animals, or specific animals, right? We're having a wolfy sort of episode.
I think we have kind of a wolfy episode going
Not on purpose. We were going to do
No.
Weird
We
animals.
need those 3 wolf moon t-shirts.
yeah, totally. Oh my god. All right, when we start up our merch, so we're gonna do that for sure. Yeah, but somehow we both landed on wolf stories, right? Like, I don't know the exact story you're telling, but we've sort of figured out that we're both talking about wolves. So, but some type of like monsters or animals that we don't know about.
Yeah, these aren't your usual wolves.
Yes, these are unusual. Both of them, I think, in their own ways. Cool. So let's see. I guess I went first last time, right? You want to go? You want to go first?
Absolutely, I can go first.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm in Michigan, at least for now. That might change soon. But anyway, I've been doing some Michigan stuff lately, and I've got another one. And this is the Michigan Dog Man, which I had only just recently found out about.
Okay, yeah, I never heard about this one.
Okay. So the first story associated with this that I have took place in 1887. 2 lumberjacks were working in the Manistee National Forest in Wexford County, Michigan, which is on the northwestern side of the Lower Peninsula. And if you're from Michigan, you always do the hands thing where you've got like
the mitten
one of your hands is is the Upper Peninsula and the other one's lower. So yeah. Anyway, so they're working in the forest and they spotted what they thought was a large wild dog. So they chased after it and it ran into a hollow log trying to hide from them. And then one of the 2 men decided that it was a great idea to poke it with a stick. I'm not sure why.
Youper. Like that, only like someone in the UP would be like, "Oh, look, there's a giant animal. Poke it." All right, sorry, go on.
Okay, well, yeah, it didn't turn out so great. So, at this point, the creature let out a terrible sounding shriek, and it stood up on its hind legs.
Whoa.
And it was at this point that the 2 guys saw that this was no ordinary dog. It was towering over them, and it had the head of a dog, but the body of a man. So they were understandably terrified and ran back and told their boss. So that was, one of the first sightings of this. There have been other ones, but
sorry, the body of a man. So like, all right, so is this the figure, but with fur, or is it literally like wolf head, like human skin body?
Well,
or is it not clear?
Yeah, I mean, like different witnesses describe it in different ways.
Okay.
But in general, it has a wolf face or a dog-like canine head with pointy ears sticking up and the nose and everything. But then its torso area kind of looks like a human, and it stands up. It's bipedal. So it's generally described as like a bipedal animal. It stands about 7 feet tall, and its eyes have been described as either blue or like an amber yellow in appearance, depending on who's telling the story. But yeah, definitely all of the things they have in common is, it has like a torso and upper body of a man. But there's something really weird about a lot of the descriptions that I came across. Apparently, its arms are overly long. So the front legs are like super long compared to the back legs.
Huh. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And witnesses often say that it has this terrifying howl that sounds a little bit like a human scream. So it almost sounds, like a werewolf, like some kind of like human wolf hybrid
Uh
type
huh.
of
Uh
thing, but
huh.
it's enormous. Okay. Um, so, a lot of these stories were collected though after an April Fool's Day joke. So in 1987, Steve Cook, who was a radio DJ at WTCM in Traverse City, Michigan, released a song that he'd written called The Legend, and it referenced actual dogman encounters that he'd heard about. But at the time, he didn't take the subject seriously. He was just having a little fun. He was trying to pull people's legs, and he's like, "Oh, I wrote this funny song based on these dogman stories I've kind of heard about." And played it on the radio. And it was just meant to be a one-off and something funny, but it captured people's attention. So much so that requests for this song started pouring into the station, and it ended up becoming one of the most requested songs.
Okay.
So people are calling and they're like, "Hey, can you play that weird Dogman song?"
Right. Right.
But not only that, it also inspired people who'd had encounters with this creature to come forward and tell their stories. And it seems like they didn't really have anybody to talk to except for this radio DJ. So they
Oh
called
wow.
the
Okay.
station. Yeah. So over the years, Cook has collected about 100 stories of these dogman reports. So I'm just going to go through a few here. So one of the more interesting accounts was described by an older man, and his name was Robert Fortney. And he said that one day in 1938, so going way back, he was 17 years old. He was fishing on the banks of the Muskegon River near Paris, Michigan, which must be super tiny. I've never heard of it. um, all at once, a pack of what looked like feral dogs emerged from the nearby woods, and Fortney was understandably pretty scared. And he remained really still and silent, hoping they would just move on and not see him. But they picked up his scent pretty quickly and they came toward him. The whole pack did. And he'd been hunting small game earlier, and he had a loaded rifle with him. So as the dogs got closer, he picked up the rifle and he fired a warning shot into the air, which, generally is going to send anything running. And the pack of dogs cowered and headed back into the forest, except for one. The one that was left was a large black dog, and it was staring at him with the strangest looking eyes Fortney had ever seen. And he's quoted as saying they were blue. What kind of dog has blue eyes? So Fortney and the dog were now only about 10 feet apart at this point, and they were watching each other warily. So Fortney shoots a second shot into the air, this time right above the dog's head. But instead of running away, the dog reared up and stood on its hind legs and just stared aggressively at him. And Fortney said, "It may be that I was just scared, but I swear that dog was smiling at me." At this
Well, that
point,
is creepy.
isn't
Yeah.
it? So, I mean, at that point, when something doesn't run with two shots fired,
Yeah.
something's going on. So Fortney's fearing for his life at this point. So he fired a shot directly at the dog after these two warning shots. And at this point, it ran back into the woods.
Crazy.
So,
Okay.
yeah, next story, 1961 in Big Rapids. Um, so this person, I'm just going to read from their, their story, their direct quotes. He said, when I was a boy, my father was the night watchman at a manufacturing plant located in a rural area between Big Rapids and Chippewa Lake, Michigan. Our house was across the street from the factory. The plant building was right next to a large wilderness area of state land. At that time, it was simply known as the Haymarsh. We didn't understand it at the time, but Dad was always very skittish about letting us play outside after dark. He would sometimes talk about hearing coyotes or bears roaming around in the Haymarsh when he was walking the perimeter of the building at night. One night in the summer of 1961, Dad walked back to the house to sit on the porch and have a cup of coffee and a sweet roll. He had a good view of the entire plant property. He saw some movement near a chain link fence behind the building. This was approximately 3 a.m., so he felt quite sure this person wasn't there by accident. He drew his gun and watched for a few minutes. That's when he noticed this was not a person at all, but something much taller. He said it appeared to be covered in brown or grayish hair. It had very broad shoulders and a powerful chest, and it alternated between walking on 4 legs, then standing up on 2. He said it seemed to be looking for something along the driveway. He said later he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He quietly moved into the house and grabbed his Kodak Signet 35 millimeter camera, which was his pride and joy. At this point, I should mention that Dad was quite a photography buff. His father had owned one of the first camera stores in Ohio, and Dad got the shutterbug from Grandpa. As he stepped back onto the front porch, the creature moved slowly along the driveway, directly under the lights. He adjusted the camera shutter for a long exposure, held it as still as he could. He said he was shaking pretty bad, and snapped a picture. So there's a picture. I'll include that in the Instagram. But then a few seconds later, the thing dropped back down to all fours and slowly moved off into the woods. Okay, another story. 1986. So this is like a year before Cook released his song on the radio in Traverse City. A man named Ray Greenway, who lived near Manistee, was driving home from the Manistee Army recruiting station. It was late and very dark out. He was on a 2-lane road surrounded by dark fields and trees on either side. And if you've ever driven, I'm sure you have, on roads like that at night, it's just pitch black.
Yeah,
you can't
right,
see anything,
right.
no street lights. It's super eerie. So all at once, he caught something in his headlights, and it was like on the side of the road in a field. It was a pair of yellow glowing eyes that reflected in the headlights. This isn't really unusual. You see deer, of course, raccoons, whatever, except for the location of the eyes. They were higher up in the air than you would expect from like a raccoon or a coyote or a
Right,
deer.
right.
So it's something tall. And as he was watching, the creature suddenly came rushing out of the darkness toward him in his car. And at this point, it leaped across the road in a single bound and crossed the 2-lane highway in a single leap, landed on the other side and disappeared into the woods. And he was quoted as saying, "There is no animal that it could be. I know this was not a deer. I saw both eyes looking at me the whole time. That, along with the leaping ability, is what I will never forget."
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, okay. A couple more.
Okay, okay.
So, winter of 1993, a teenage girl named Courtney went outside near sunset to sneak a cigarette behind her parents' home. They lived near a town called Reed City. While she smoked, Courtney was facing a large abandoned barn on the neighbor's property. And she said that barn had always kind of spooked me. It was filled with rusty old equipment. The outer planks were all rotten, and it sagged and leaned in every direction. My dad said to stay away, as the whole thing could collapse. On that evening, I was standing about 50 feet from the barn, and I saw sunlight coming through the gaps in the siding. She must have brushed it off and looked away, but a few moments later, something in the barn caught her attention again. And she said, there was some movement. The light flickered, but I couldn't really tell what it was. Then it turned its head back and looked straight at me. It was at least 6 feet tall, if not more. It was dark colored and it had a dog-like appearance with a pointy nose and really big pointy ears. So at this point, she runs into the house to get a flashlight, but when she returned, the animal was gone. She walked closer to the barn to see if there were any tracks or any signs, but there weren't any, and she never saw it again. However, later on, she mentioned it to her next-door neighbor who lived in the house with the barn. It was another teenage girl around her age, and the neighbor actually claimed to have seen something similar. She described it as like being the size of a buffalo, but in the shape of a dog, so immense, and in the same barn a few months before Courtney's sighting. And she said that she had been so terrified at the time that she was like left almost like on the verge of hysteria for days. Her father had taken his gun, he'd searched the barn and the area, didn't come up with anything. And yeah, so, and then I'm going to do one more.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So, this is from Reddit. And I found this in my research for all of the, like there are a lot of Michigan dogman encounters
And
out
are
there.
all these like in a similar area? I mean, Michigan's pretty big. Is it like?
Right. Well, there are a lot. I mean, I was going to get into that later, but
Oh, okay.
actually,
Okay.
dogman encounters have been reported, as far back as ancient Egypt. I mean, it was like one of their, their deities.
Oh, right.
And they've been reported in every single continent except for Antarctica. So it isn't like a dogman kind of thing that's unique, but there is like this specific Michigan dogman that seems to have a lot of similar stories going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually extends into Wisconsin. In fact, there was a book written, I think, about like a Wisconsin werewolf. But I'm not doing the Wisconsin ones. I'm just doing the Michigan.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a direct quote from Reddit. My dogman encounter happened in November of 2013 in the eastern Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It was on a property of a town called Cedarville. The house my husband and I were staying in up there had a big front yard, but other than that, and the gravel driveway, everything else is pretty deep hardwood forest. I also want to state ahead of time that this happened around 11 p.m., so everything that's beyond the porch lights was pretty hard to see. And up there, no street lights. You can see the stars at night because there's no light pollution. It's just so black. And if you're surrounded by forest, it's just, really, really difficult to see. So she said, my husband and I had gone outside to have a cigarette, and we took our rifle with us whenever we were hanging around outside because there's bear and stuff back there in that area. I was up on the porch still, and my husband had gone down the steps into the yard and was facing toward me when we heard these really heavy, slow footsteps coming up the driveway through the woods. It sounded like a really big man, but there was this weird, heavy breathing too, and the footsteps, even though they sounded like a person, sounded heavier than anything I had ever heard walking in the woods, including a full-size adult bear.
Wow.
So this is a person, who's been in the woods,
Yeah.
knows what a bear sounds like, and this is something unique. So she continues, my husband looked at me and mouthed, "What the fuck?" And I was trying to figure out what it was that I was hearing, but nothing I had ever heard out there in those woods in my whole life matched the size and breathing and gait of whatever this was. So I was confused and shaking my head. I've hunted and tracked basically everything that's indigenous to northern Michigan since I was small, so I was honestly terrified that this animal was a complete unknown to me by sound. It walked out of the tree line at the edge of the yard behind my husband, and it was a lot taller than him. It was at least 7 feet tall or more, and I'd estimate the weight for its size at around 400 pounds. It was on two legs and had super dark black fur that was somehow even darker than the nighttime dark of the woods. It was walking back and forth at that distance from us the whole time this encounter happened, but it would not step into where the perimeter of the porch light was. I had a really
Whoa.
hard
Okay.
time, yeah, I had a really hard time making out its torso for that reason, but I saw a wolf like head and snout with pointed ears that stuck straight up, and instead of front legs and paws, it had really disproportionately long arms and hands. It was on two legs this whole time, walking back and forth. I freaked out and grabbed the rifle and just started shooting at it and yelling at my husband to run and get up on the porch. So he did. And then he took the gun from me and told me to find something to use the weapon and go inside and hide. So I did. I got a big knife and went and locked myself in our bedroom closet, and I could hear
Oh
my
my
husband
gosh.
I could hear my husband shooting and reloading a bunch for about another 10 minutes. He came in and told me through the closet door that the dog man had finally run off, but he wasn't sure if it was going to possibly come back. So we were both pretty terrified, and I ended up staying in that closet all night until sunrise with my husband guarding the door with a gun. He told me that he thought I had hit it when I was shooting at it at first, but the next day we didn't find any blood or hair or anything, which I thought was weird because I really thought I must have shot and wounded it a couple times. It moved incredibly fast, though, and was agile enough to run through the brush without really mowing it down or making a bunch of noise like big animals usually do. The whole encounter was incredibly weird and scary. My husband also said that he did see it sort of hunch over and drop down onto all fours a few times while it was running back and forth, but that when it ran away for good that night, it was running insanely fast and on two legs like a man.
Whoa. I
And
mean,
that's the
that's got to be
story of the
terrifying.
Michigan Dogman.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's crazy. So, I mean, these people are obviously seeing something, right? Like,
They're seeing something.
and these
Right. There are
are,
too many accounts for it
there's
not
too
for
many
it to be
accounts,
just yeah.
and it's also people who are used to seeing animals. I mean, I think that's probably the
Hmm.
biggest thing too. It's like, they're not I mean, dogs don't stand up on their hind legs,
Right.
and
And also like one of the weird little details, and I find this interesting, is that like there were different accounts that mention that the front legs were longer than the back
right,
legs,
right.
which is a strange detail to come up with on your own.
Yeah, and bears can stand up, but people like that know the difference, right? Like I would
Hmm.
even know the
Right.
difference between a bear. I mean, I've seen bears plenty
Right.
of times in the woods, and I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, I've seen coyotes, but I don't think I've ever seen
Right.
a
If you grow up
wolf.
in that area, you're
But
used to it. You
yeah,
know what to
but
look for.
so I feel like this is credible, right? Like it's like you can't tell them they didn't see what they saw. All you can do is argue about what it is that they saw. But they're obviously seeing something over and over again. Their descriptions are like so similar. Like whatever this thing is, it's there, right? Like
Right.
whether or not we've kept track of it in the science books or whatever, like certainly remains. But it's clear that there's whatever this thing is. Like there's that famous bear in New Jersey that like they think something had something wrong with its paw or something, so it learned to walk on its hind legs. So there's all this like cell phone footage and this like bear that would walk around this residential neighborhood on its hind legs like all the time.
Hmm.
And so like people just thought it was hilarious, and so they kept seeing it over and over again. But I mean, this is clearly something that's happening
Right.
there. I mean,
And it's also not a one-off like that,
right,
because we're talking about this last story was in the Upper Peninsula. You've got a bridge separating it,
yeah,
or you got to go up through Wisconsin to get there. So, either this thing travels great distances and crosses bridges, or there's more than one.
or there's more than one, right, right. Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. And I mean, just like trying to I was like trying to put myself there when you were like telling the story, and like just imagine being way up there and just
Right.
like seeing something like that.
Well, there were
I mean,
stories I
that's
didn't
got to be fucking
include. Yeah, there
terrifying.
were other stories, yeah, of like, like kids that like their parents had left them home in a
Yeah,
cabin with their older cousin or
right,
something, and
right,
like looking out the window and seeing something standing on its hind legs looking in.
totally.
Which
Well,
feels like a fairy tale. It feels like a Grimm's Gone Wrong
yeah,
kind of
right, right,
thing.
totally. Um, Well, cool. Well, I mean, that kind of like that's very apropos of the story I'm about to tell you.
Okay,
Okay,
let's hear
so
it.
this it's very very eerily similar. So this is the story of the Martin family. Okay, so this story begins in Palmyra, Maine, in 2006. The Martin family had just moved to a farm in Palmyra following an accident that befell Eric at his job. Eric Martin, the sort of dad. So it was in an old and beautiful farm, secluded with dense woods all around. So Eric Martin was a hunter, but his wife didn't like his wife Shelley didn't like guns. So when they moved, she wouldn't let them keep him in the house. So he and his son built this sort of strong box, put all the guns in it, and lifted it up into this loft in the barn. Right, so it was all sort of tucked away. Now, in the evenings, Shelley and Eric would have coffee on their front porch as a ritual. So one night they're out there and they notice something in the woods, and they say they see some strange lights down in the trees. They said it was like pulsing on and off. Eric just said it was a light like he'd never seen before, and that it would change, right? And this is something they kept talking about, like that at first they thought it was a flashlight, but it would change and move around. So it would change in intensity, it would change its behavior. And so they felt like it was unnatural, right? So Eric and his son decide to go, his son Sean, they decide to go investigate. So as they get closer, the light disappears, right? So they're walking up to the woods, and they can't see the light anymore. But they're like, okay, we're still going to go check this out. So they both go into the woods, and he says later it's like very creepy, right? He has this creepy feeling about the whole thing. So Eric now decides that they should split up and turn their flashlights off, right? With the hopes of catching what they think at this point was a poacher.
Yikes.
Yeah. So now
That sounds scary.
yeah, totally. So now Eric says as he's walking through the woods, he starts having these feelings that he's never had before. And he said it was a fear that he's never felt before, even when hunting. Right. So this is a guy who's used to being out in the woods, who's used to animals being around, who's used to, isn't easily scarable. And even when he is scared, he said this is a different type of fear. And he said it was weird. But basically, something was out there. And he sees something sort of off to the left of him, some type of figure is there, and then it disappears. Everything is still. So now, like, I think they said they didn't hear any animals or sounds or anything. It's just totally quiet, right? Which has got to be terrifying. So now they turn the lights back on and they start looking for tracks. Don't find anything. Okay. So the next morning, Chelsea's then boyfriend, Chelsea, sorry, is the daughter. Chelsea's then boyfriend, Nathan Harth, comes over, and they decide to go for a walk in the woods. They hadn't like talked about with their parents about, what they had experienced the night before. But so they're just out for a walk, right? They got the dogs. They said it was a gorgeous day, and they're going for a walk in the woods. So as soon as they reach the woods, the dogs take off like they smell something. So they run off in the woods, they're barking, and basically they Chelsea and Nathan go to sort of find them, and said they had found something, and it was a very large hole I think it was like kind of in the ground. And Nathan said it was odd how round it was, like it had
Like
been
in the actual ground, like in the
yeah,
trail,
like
or
it
okay.
like yes, in the ground, like it had been dug with care, right? He said it was like kind of oddly. It was very like clear that it was intentional. It wasn't just some like sinkhole or regular animal hole. But he said it kind of looked human made. So Chelsea gets freaked out and is like, let's get the fuck out of here. So they do. Okay. Now it's Memorial Day weekend. Chelsea goes off to bed. Eric and Shelley are out on the front porch like they do. And they notice how silent the night is, right? It's like, again, that like very eerie, silence, right? No
Right.
birds, no rustling, no
Right.
nothing. What's that?
Which for people who are unfamiliar with like being out in nature often happens when there's a predator around.
Right,
Everything gets quiet.
right. Things get, they leave and get quiet. So, okay. So this seems odd to them, right? So Shelley picks up a flashlight and shines it out into the misty field to see if there's anything there. They don't see anything. But after she puts it down, Eric starts getting this strange feeling, right? He said you could call it hunter's instinct, that there was danger, right? He starts feeling just this feeling of danger. And he's like, okay, we got to get you out of here. And so he grabs his wife, like physically grabs her and starts dragging her into the house all of a sudden, right? And that's when they hear a sort of rustling. They look up, and off in the dark, they see 3 sets of glowing eyes looking back at them from the darkness of the field in front of their house. Shelley describes the eyes as almost fluorescent. And then they see another set of eyes. Eric tells his wife to shine his light over there, and they see yet another one, right? So now there's 5. By Eric's description, he said they appeared mad and wanted to come at them. So they run the fuck inside of the house and lock the door, right? So Shelley keeps trying to look at them because they're like, they don't understand what these things are, right? Eric keeps trying to pull her away from the window because he's freaked out, right? Like Eric, he knows it's not a bear, right? It's definitely, they're definitely standing on hind legs, furry, and sort of, I think eventually they describe him as sort of wolf-like, right? But that's not really how they're seeing them, as something that they've never seen before, something that walks on 2 legs and that
Were
is
they
absolutely massive.
were they circling them? Were the
Not yet.
sets of eyes like all in a line, or was
Well,
it
there was like
kind
sort
of
of
like
a group
surrounding
of
them?
3, and then there was like one over there, and then one over there. So yeah, I guess they are starting to sort of surround them. So, and Shelley says these things are massive, like 7 or 8 feet tall. So they feel helpless. Eric's guns are in the, locked away in the barn. But he's also unsure if they're even safe in the house, right? These things are so big that it really does feel like if they wanted in, they could just come in. So Eric wants to go get his guns, and Shelley is like, no, stay in the house. I don't want you going out there, but I'm going to go up and check on our daughter, right? So she goes up. Chelsea's sleeping. She wakes Chelsea up, takes her over to the window, and shows her what's going on. She looks out the window and sees the figures out there, and says, cool. And then goes back to bed. Like, which I thought was like hilarious. She just like rolls her eyes, like,
Yeah.
She probably thought it was like, something, like wolves or coyotes, something out there but she, anyways. But Shelley, on the other hand, she can see this clearly a group of 5 crouched down out in their yard, right? So she said they're sort of crouched over, huddled together as if they were like discussing something. And she said then one suddenly stands up.
They're like, yeah, we want to eat those people.
Yeah, totally. One suddenly stands up all the way on its hind legs and looks straight at her. She says it's massive, about 7 or 8 feet tall. And she said it's almost too much for her brain to process. Meanwhile, Eric is downstairs and he's in conflict, right? He doesn't know how to protect his family. He's thinking like, maybe I can make a run for it to the car, back it up to the house, and, get everyone in the car and get the fuck out of there, right? So now he's like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. Now he goes out on the porch and he sees them still off in the distance, right? They're sort of, I imagine this is a very large sort of, it's a farm. So it's like their yard's huge or whatever. But so he's sort of off, they're off away, but he's making it for his car. But like I said, he was injured in some sort of accident, work-related accident. I'm not sure exactly what was hurt, but he was still in pain and he said he couldn't run. right? So he's like sort of hobbling over to the car, right? Which is about 20 feet away. He's terrified, but he can't move fast. So he's just sort of making his way over there. Now, meanwhile, after realizing that she hadn't heard the dogs in a while, Shelley goes to go find them, right? She hears them scurrying. She hears like a scurrying sound and finds the dogs hiding, right? These are hunting dogs, right? These are dogs that are like trained like to chase after, predators, big scary animals. And they're like hiding in a room in the cabin because they're terrified. So this is all happening while Eric is still trying to make his way to the car. And he gets there. And he's sort of fumbling around trying to like open it up, and the safety light comes on, right? The what do you call it? The automatic security light lights up the car. And so he's like standing there basically completely lit up. He can't see them, but they can certainly see him. And the next thing he knows, he actually sees one is right there standing in front of him. Right. So he's got a good look at this thing.
What does it look like?
7 or 8 feet tall, like hairy, like dog-like, but standing on its, hind legs. So, he said they look at each other, right? So he's locked eyes with this thing and he thinks he's basically dead, right? But it freezes and kind of gets freaked out and runs, right? And he's like, okay. So he takes this opportunity. He just is like, fuck the car. Like, I'm just getting out of here. So he goes back to the house. When he gets there, his wife's mad, right? She didn't want him to leave in the first place and like leave there, so basically they decide to call 911. Shelley tries to explain to the cops what's going on, but they're like, look, you guys are confused. These are just harmless animals, and hangs up on them. So now they know they're fucked, right? They're stuck in their house. They have no way of protecting themselves. They don't even know if they're actually safe in their house. They've tried to call the police. They've tried to call for help. They don't know anybody else there, right? They just moved in, right? Nobody's coming for them. Meanwhile, there's like 5 or 6 giant creatures stalking them from outside their house.
Yikes.
So Eric's scared, obviously, and Shelley can't tell, Shelley can tell that Eric is scared, and that scares her, right? So she's used to this guy who's like, probably pretty fearless when it comes to this type of stuff. So he sits down to think about... So
you take your cues,
right.
you know?
Yep. So Eric sits down to think about the situation when it kind of dawns on him that the creatures don't like the light, which is really interesting because that's one of the things in one of your stories, right? Like that it wouldn't enter the perimeter of this light.
Yes.
Right. And so he realizes that's why it took off. And probably what saved him at the car was that safety light coming on. Okay. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go and try and get one of these guns. So he walks out towards the bar, waving his arms around, trying to trip the barn light, right? Thinking that these things will not come into the light. Barn light comes on, but now all of a sudden they're all right there, just on the outside of the lights, right? Just like sort of lurking. And he says they surround him, and he says they do it in a way that sort of expresses intelligence, that it seems like they're going into a hunting pattern. Right? That they're sort of walking around him, like kind of encircling him. And now he feels trapped in the light because he knows if he moves out of the sensor, it'll go off and he's screwed.
Wow.
But he's like...
It reminds me of like reading like Jack London novels.
Right. So now he's like, okay, I can't get to the barn. So now I'm going to just try and get back into the house before the light turns off. So he makes his way back, is able to get into the house, but now they definitely feel like all their options have run out. They can't get to the car. They can't get to the guns. The police aren't coming. So they arm themselves with household items like hatchets and knives and stuff like that. They go get Chelsea, and they barricade themselves in a bedroom and decide to just wait it out for the morning, right? Soon they hear the creatures walking around their house. Shelley said that she could hear them growl, and it was like a low guttural sound.
It's similar to like the one story that I
Yep,
told.
exactly. And the only thing that was actually between them was the bedroom window, and so they're totally freaked out. And they basically stay that way until the morning light comes. And when that does, it's a huge relief for them. These things had disappeared, right? So Eric calls his son, Sean, to come back over, and they go to investigate, and they find huge tracks with giant claws, and said that whatever was walking out there was walking on two legs, right? Based on the tracks. And Shelley actually wonders if, them disturbing that hole the day before is actually what sort of, inspired them to come out and, Eric clearly feels like they were hunting him, but he also does admit that if they wanted to, kill them, eat them, get into the house, they could have. Right. So they never really come out and say what they are, but it's clear that they're describing some type of giant bipedal wolf-like creature,
Wolf type deal.
wolf
Yeah.
type deal that was intelligent, with shiny eyes.
Sounds just like
I
mine.
know, isn't that crazy?
Okay, this is
Yeah.
weird, and I think we should tell everybody.
What's that?
What we decided to do was just kind of like creatures.
Yeah, we're gonna do
It
animals.
was
Like,
pretty open, and
Yeah, it
we
was pretty
both
open.
came. We both came up with the same.
I know, that's
similar
crazy,
kind of creature.
right.
We didn't know.
yeah, and I thought there were going to be similar stories. Well, you said you were doing like a wolf dog. I was like, oh, and I'd already been thinking about doing this one because I'm like, was kind of obsessed with this story. Cause like, I think originally I was like, oh, it's like, the lights thing is interesting. I'm like, oh, are these like alien hunters or something like that? But
Right. Well, I brought up Jack London when I was
Yeah.
a kid. I read like White Fang and Call of the Wild. I was like
Yeah.
super into it. I was like a nerdy UP kid. And I remember like one of the scenes in one of those books, there was someone like out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, and wolves were stalking him, and he had to like light a ring of fire and sit in the middle of it to keep the wolves away.
Okay.
And they were kind of like around the perimeter watching,
Oh, whoa. Okay.
but they'd stay away from the fire.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think these things are?
God, I don't know. I mean, they almost sound like some kind of crazy wolf hybrid. I mean, they're obviously
Yeah.
larger than normal wolves that we're aware of, but it's almost like a kind of like a monster wolf. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, like when I first heard the story I was like, oh, are these like some type of like interdimensional hunters or like aliens or something like that? I guess on the lights,
Okay.
but no, but seriously, like I think I'm definitely of the mind that we don't know all the animals that are out there. Like all the people that are like, oh, a Bigfoot
Right, for
couldn't
sure.
possibly exist because we've civilized most of the planet at this point, and like there's no way that these things could exist without us knowing. I think
Right.
that's arrogant nonsense. Like we
Right.
don't know.
We haven't even explored like so much of the ocean so
Yes.
far.
Yeah, we
We
know-
don't really know what all is out there.
Totally. And people who say that, they certainly haven't been out west, right? They certainly haven't been
Right.
up to fucking Maine, because something intelligent that doesn't want to be found certainly could exist there. Like
Right.
was it up in Washington? It was somewhere that, that guy lived for like 20 years, like 200 feet from a hiking trail. And he would like break into people's houses and like steal food from them and stuff. And I think he literally lived for like 20 years and no one knew he was there. So it's certainly possible to for something that's intelligent that doesn't want to be found,
Which makes
to
sense.
exist.
Why would you want to?
Right. And so I don't know if if this is some type of like other creature like a Yeti, or if there's some relationship with it there, but like I don't really see why there couldn't be other intelligent types of animals out there, right? That we just don't really know about yet.
Right.
And these things are behaving in a way that isn't very animal-like, right? Like he said he felt like he was being hunted, but at the same time, like none of this story and none of the ones that you told, actually no one got hurt, right? And so imagine seeing something 7 foot tall staring at you is going to feel menacing.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, no matter whether it really meant anybody harm at all, like, were these things just curious?
Maybe they were lonely. Maybe they're like,
Maybe they
hey,
were
guys.
like, we just want to like make friends. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah. Like, what do you plan? Like,
so, but yeah, it was like that. You saw the from the last episode. You saw that film that I saw too. The what was
Missing
it?
411.
The Missing 411.
Hunters for the hunted.
But yeah, but like that one part where like those guys are out, they have that secret campsite, right? Where that they hike out to, and they said year after year they would hear these like crazy sounds, like you know, they clearly like sort of implying that it's like some type of like Bigfoot or something, but it was like they recorded one of them and that sounded insane, right?
Right.
It sounded like at first it was like a monkey yelling, and then it was like, it kind of sounded like somebody speaking a weird language, like it kind of sounded like Japanese or something. Remember that? It was like very strange, and it had like very strange vocal register. But you know, this notion that, you know, there was also like lights sort of around them, right? They saw like a tube of light moving through the woods at one point. And so who knows, maybe there were such a thing as like some type of creature out there that has some type of supernatural qualities to it too. Like, I don't know. You know, maybe it's all not just so cut and dry, but anyways, something's happening. Something weird is out there, right?
Right. I mean, I'm not going to discount. There's so many accounts that I came across in researching my stories. People are seeing something.
Yes, they're definitely seeing
even
something.
If it's a gigantic wolf,
right?
You know, there's something they're seeing. You know.
Yeah, totally. So, but now I'm like, I want to know, I want to know like more about this. Like, I just feel like it's one that like people know all about Yeti and all that, but I've never heard of this stuff. I mean, I've heard about this. I thought this was an isolated event.
I was reading there are more dogman sightings than sightings of Bigfoot.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
supposedly.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
All
right. Well, I feel pretty good. How do you feel?
I feel pretty good too.
Cool.
This is cool.
So yeah, I think we're going to be launching our YouTube channel, where it's just going to, in case you want to listen to us on YouTube for some reason, but yeah, so that'll be a place you can find us as well.
Right. I don't know. I listen to stuff like this on YouTube all the time.
Yeah, good. So
fall asleep at night.
For those who prefer YouTube, I'm not sure exactly when we're gonna launch it, but it will be soon. And going forward, we'll have it up there. So, but yeah. Otherwise, yeah. If you like our podcast, definitely rate and review us on iTunes. That helps us too. So
5 stars.
5 stars.
And if you have any ideas for stories, or you just want to get a hold of us, or you want to correct us on something that we got wrong, shadowlandpodcast@gmail.com.
Cool. All right. Well, so I guess until next time.
Until next time. Talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Shadowland Podcast is produced by Seth Jablon and Christina Callaghan. Edited by Tim Kelly. Theme music by Tim Lincoln.
Thanks, Tim.